Are you into strange and spooky? Then you need to check out Shadow Market on June 27th from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. at the Manchester Event and Visitor Center in Manchester, Tennessee. It's just a short drive from Nashville. Shadow Market's a living tapestry of gothic goods, high fantasy, horror, dark art, oddities, and all things wonderfully weird. Pre-purchase tickets are just $11 or $15 at the door on the day of the event. You can purchase tickets and vendor booths now at shadowmarketus.com. Again, that's shadowmarketus.com. And be sure to follow Shadow Market on Facebook at facebook.com/shadowmarketus. Stay spooky. Welcome back to Southern Ghost Stories. I'm the American Hauntstorian Allen Sircy. Today we're headed to one of my favorite places in the entire country. We're going to Savannah, Georgia. So much history there. And if you guys have been listening to the show for a while, you know that's where I got my start in the paranormal. I went back in, I think, 2015, 2016. My wife took me kicking and screaming. I didn't want to go. I wanted to go somewhere. I wanted to go to the beach. Went to Savannah. I fell in love with the history and the hauntings. So today we're going to one of the oldest and most haunted cemeteries in the American South. It's a place where thousands of bodies lie beneath moss-covered oaks and broken headstones. It's a place where federal soldiers once ripped open graves during the Civil War, where duelists and revolutionaries are buried side by side, and where ghost stories have drifted through the cemetery for generations. But today's story, it isn't just about the hauntings. It's about death, legacy, and one of the strangest controversies in Georgia history involving two of the most important figures of the American Revolution, Gwinnett and Nathanael Greene. One was a signer of the Declaration of Independence, whose political rivalry ended in bloodshed after a duel at dawn. The other was George Washington's most trusted general, a military genius whose remains disappeared for decades beneath a neglected cemetery. And in a bizarre twist of history, both men became the center of controversies involving exhumed bodies, disputed graves, political battles, and questions about whether the remains buried in Savannah today are actually who officials claim they are. This is the story of Colonial Park Cemetery. Long before Savannah became famous for ghost tours and paranormal TV shows, Colonial Park Cemetery stood at the center of the city's history. Established in 1750, the cemetery originally began as a small parish burial ground maintained by Christ Church. At the time, Savannah was still a young colonial settlement struggling to survive disease, heat, war, and the unpredictable dangers of frontier life. Over time, the cemetery expanded repeatedly as Savannah grew. Originally called the South Broad Street Cemetery, it served as the city's primary burial ground for more than a century. Thousands of people were laid to rest there. Wealthy merchants, soldiers, politicians, children, victims of disease outbreaks, and just regular citizens whose names disappeared into history long, long ago. Today, Colonial Park Cemetery covers roughly 6 acres, but historically it was much larger. As Savannah expanded during the 19th century, roads and sidewalks gradually cut through portions of the burial ground. Entire sections disappeared beneath development. Historians estimate more than 10,000 people may still lie beneath the soil there, even though fewer than 600 headstones remain visible today. Some graves now rest beneath nearby streets and buildings. And honestly, that alone explains part of why Savannah feels so haunted. It's difficult to build a modern city atop centuries of graves without creating stories. By the time the Civil War arrived, Colonial Park Cemetery had already witnessed more suffering than most places ever will. Then General William Tecumseh Sherman marched into Savannah in December of 1864. Federal soldiers occupied the city during the final months of the war, and Colonial Park Cemetery became an informal campground for bored troops waiting for their orders. And what happened next? It horrified the locals. Soldiers vandalized headphones, carving false dates and mocking inscriptions into the stones. One of the most famous examples involves the grave of Savannah, who actually died at age 22. Federal soldiers altered the marker to claim she lived to be 122 years old. But the vandalism, it went far beyond the graffiti. According to local accounts, soldiers opened graves and removed coffins, using them as makeshift beds during their stay. Imagine walking through the cemetery after the war and discovering open tombs and disturbed remains scattered throughout the grounds. That kind of desecration leaves scars on a place. And Colonial Park Cemetery, it never really fully recovered. Even now, many visitors claim the cemetery feels strangely heavy after dark. Reports of glowing orbs, shadow figures, and unexplained voices have circulated for decades. But among all the spirits said to wander Colonial Park Cemetery, two names tower above the rest historically: Gwinnett and Nathanael Greene. Gwinnett is one of the strangest founding fathers in American history because today he's arguably more famous for dying than for living. Born in England around 1735, Gwinnett immigrated to the American colonies seeking wealth and opportunity. Unlike many of the educated elite who shaped the Revolution, Gwinnett lacked military experience and came from very modest beginnings. He worked as a merchant and a plantation owner before eventually settling into Georgia. Ambitious and politically aggressive, Gwinnett quickly became involved in revolutionary politics as tension with Britain escalated during the 1770s. Eventually, he rose to prominence within Georgia's revolutionary government and became one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. That alone would have guaranteed him a place in American history. But Gwinnett's personality created enemies everywhere. He was deeply ambitious, thin-skinned, and prone to conflict with other leaders. Among those rivals was General Lachlan McIntosh, a respected military officer and a fellow Georgian whose family wielded enormous influence. Their hatred for one another became intensely personal. According to accounts from the time, Gwinnett accused McIntosh's brother of trading illegally with the British during the Revolutionary War. McIntosh retaliated publicly, branding Gwinnett, quote-unquote, a scoundrel and a lying rascal. Them's fighting words. In the 18th century, those words carried enormous weight, and honor mattered. Your public reputation mattered. And insults between gentlemen often ended with pistols. Dueling had become deeply embedded in Southern culture by that point. Though technically illegal, affairs of honor occurred often. Men who felt publicly assaulted challenged one another to duels, often meeting outside the city limits at dawn. Sometimes a duelist intentionally missed to preserve honor without bloodshed. Other times, men died in muddy fields while doctors waited nearby, helplessly. On May 16, 1777, Gwinnett and McIntosh met in a meadow just outside of Savannah. The duel was brutal from the beginning. Standing only 4 paces apart, the men raised pistols and fired almost simultaneously. Both were struck in the leg. McIntosh survived, but Gwinnett's wound quickly became infected. In an era before antibiotics, infection often proved deadlier than the initial injury itself. 3 days later, Bud Gwinnett died in agony. The duel shocked Georgia. A signer of the Declaration of Independence had effectively killed another revolutionary leader over personal pride and political hatred. But the story became even stranger after death. Gwinnett was buried inside Colonial Park Cemetery, yet over time, the exact location of his grave, it became a little murky. Headstones shifted, records vanished, and as the cemetery deteriorated during the 19th century, many graves became impossible to identify confidently. Then, nearly 2 centuries later, Savannah decided to find him. In 1959, historian Arthur Funk led efforts to exhume what officials believe were Gwinnett's remains. Researchers located a deteriorated grave believed to belong to the founding father. But when the grave was opened, investigators discovered skeletal remains, including a damaged femur consistent with Gwinnett's duel wound. At first, the discovery seemed conclusive, but controversy erupted almost immediately. Dr. A.J. Waring, a respected local physician involved in the examination, refused to confirm publicly that the femur belonged to Gwinnett, and those doubts began to spread around Savannah. The remains were sent to the Smithsonian Institute for further analysis. That's when the situation became bizarre. Marshall Newman, an archaeologist with the Smithsonian, concluded the skeleton likely belonged to an adult woman, not Button Gwinnett. Even more damaging, he determined the damage to the femur occurred after death, rather than during the duel. Suddenly, Savannah faced an embarrassing possibility. The city may have dug up the wrong body. And despite the uncertainty, local officials eventually declared the remains were probably Gwinnett's anyway. But the controversy, it didn't end there. Another city wanted the body. Augusta, Georgia, home to the remains of other Declaration signers, Lyman Hall and George Walton, argued Gwinnett should be reburied alongside them beneath the signers' monument. Politicians and historians began debating who had rightful claim to the remains of a founding father whose identity might not even be certain. The dispute escalated all the way to the Georgia Attorney General. Meanwhile, the alleged remains of Button Gwinnett sat inside an oak, copper-lined coffin stored in historian Arthur Funk's guest room, while lawyers argued about what exactly to do with them. That detail almost sounds fictional. One of America's founding fathers, or maybe an unknown woman, resting in a historian's spare bedroom while politicians fought over where he was going to be buried. Eventually, the state ruled Gwinnett would remain in Savannah. In 1964, the remains were reinterred in Colonial Park Cemetery. Whether they truly belonged to Button Gwinnett, it's still not clear today. And amazingly, Gwinnett wasn't the only revolutionary figure whose remains became the center of controversy. If Button Gwinnett represented political ambition and ego, Nathanael Greene represented military brilliance. George Washington trusted few men more deeply than Greene. Born in Rhode Island to a Quaker family, Greene lacked formal military training when the Revolution began. Yet through relentless self-education and raw intelligence, he transformed himself into one of the greatest commanders of the war. Historians often credit Greene's southern campaigns with exhausting British forces and paving the way for the ultimate victory at Yorktown. Even British General Cornwallis reportedly respected him immensely. And after the Revolution ended, Georgia rewarded Greene with a plantation confiscated from loyalists outside Savannah. For a brief period, Greene seemed poised to enjoy peace after years of war. Then tragedy struck. In 1786, while visiting the plantation during a brutal Savannah summer, Greene reportedly suffered what doctors described as sunstroke. He died at only 44 years old. The death stunned the nation. One of America's greatest military minds was gone. Greene was buried in Savannah, but over time his grave faded into obscurity. By the late 19th century, a Colonial Park cemetery had fallen into severe neglect. Broken vaults littered the property. Weeds overtook graves. Children played among the ruins. Well, then Rhode Island came looking for their favorite son. In 1900, officials from Greene's home state arrived in Savannah determined to recover his remains and return him up north. What they discovered horrified them. Colonial Park Cemetery looked abandoned and desecrated. Vaults had been opened. Gravestones toppled. Trash scattered across portions of the grounds. Eventually, investigators located a vault connected to a Savannah's former British royal governor. Inside, they discovered a coffin marked with Nathanael Greene's name alongside the remains of Greene's son, who drowned in the Savannah River years earlier. The discovery ignited another political battle. Rhode Island argued Greene belonged in the state where he was born. Georgia insisted he belonged in Savannah, the city he helped defend and where he had died. The matter became so contentious that Greene's descendants were asked to vote on where the general should finally be laid to rest. While arguments continued, Nathanael Greene's skeleton was placed inside a bank vault at the southern bank of the state of Georgia for safekeeping. And that's just bananas. The skeletal remains of George Washington's most trusted general locked in a bank vault, while two states argued over who should own his bones. Eventually, 18 of Greene's 23 descendants voted to keep him in Savannah. In 1902, Greene and his son were reburied beneath the monument that still stands there today in Johnson Square. And yet, like Gwinnett, controversy still lingers. Because with Colonial Park Cemetery's long history of damaged graves, displaced remains, and missed markers, some historians quietly question whether every set of remains recovered from the cemetery was truly identified correctly. That uncertainty only deepens the eerie atmosphere surrounding that place. Colonial Park Cemetery, it's not haunted merely because ghost stories accumulated there. It's haunted because history itself became unsettled. The bodies disturbed, graves lost, revolutionary heroes exhumed and argued over like political trophies, Union soldiers sleeping inside stolen coffins. And beneath it all, thousands of forgotten dead still resting beneath sidewalks and streets. Even the city's murder stories carry that same lingering darkness. In 1901, a man named Samuel Baker was found brutally beaten inside the cemetery near midnight. At first, police assumed he was just drunk and arrested him for public intoxication. Only later did doctors discover he suffered multiple crushing blows to the head. Before dying, Baker muttered deliriously about being attacked by two men, and his killers were never identified. And that's Colonial Park Cemetery in a nutshell. A place where history, violence, politics, death, and mystery overlap constantly. And perhaps that's why so many visitors claim something still lingers there. So, I know you guys came for the ghost story, and Colonial Park Cemetery's got a pretty fun one. One of the most famous modern ghost stories connected to Colonial Park emerged in 2011 when a family from Akron, Ohio captured what many people believe is one of the most compelling pieces of paranormal footage ever recorded in the city. The family had been walking through the cemetery during the evening when they began filming casually among the old graves and moss-covered pathways. At first, nothing unusual appeared on the video. Then suddenly, a small figure resembling a young boy can be seen darting between tombstones in the distance. The child appears pale and oddly translucent, moving unnaturally fast before climbing or almost leaping toward a tree and vanishing from sight entirely. The family insisted there had been no children inside the cemetery at the time, and the footage quickly spread online, becoming known as the quote-unquote Savannah Ghost Boy video. Paranormal investigators and skeptics debated the clip endlessly. Some argued it was merely a trick of light or a motion blur, while others pointed out how bizarre the movement appeared compared to a normal child running. What made the footage especially unsettling was the location itself. Colonial Park Cemetery contains the graves of countless children who died during Savannah's devastating yellow fever epidemics, particularly the outbreak of 1820 that overwhelmed the city with death. For many locals, the video seemed less like a hoax and more like another reminder that Colonial Park Cemetery may truly be one of the most haunted places in the country. You can find the video on YouTube and if you want to see it for yourself. And if you enjoyed this video, check out my book, Southern Ghost Stories Savannah, where I dive deeper into the haunted history of Savannah. So many great stories from the Sorrel Wheat House. I had an experience there. The 1790 Inn. And there's other haunted, creepy cemeteries like Laurel Grove. You can find Southern Ghost Stories Savannah. It's on Kindle. It's on Amazon. And if you have Kindle Unlimited, you can read it for free. That's a pretty good perk there. And speaking of books, make sure you head over to Amazon and pick up my latest one, Pistols at Red River, the Andrew Jackson dueling story. Just something fun about dudes dressing up in suits and going to a field to shoot each other over a woman. And also, make sure you leave a review. Subscribe to the show. That really helps more than people know. It helps them find the podcast. And have you been to Monster City Madhouse yet? MonsterCityMadhouse.com. Their new shirt, man, it's a whole lot of fun. The Bride of Frankenstein has spoken. And honestly, she may have a point. The new Mini Monsters tee throws together a chaotic crew of pint-sized creatures, creepy cuteness, and vintage Halloween cartoon vibes into one gloriously weird design, featuring tiny vampires, little mummies, swampy troublemakers, and one very unimpressed bride rocking the legendary line, "Boys are gross." Not sure about that. You can use promo code SAVE10 to get 10% off your order. That's right, SAVE10 is a promo code you enter to get 10% off. It's MonsterCityMadhouse.com. Also, be sure you're following Southern Ghost Stories on Facebook and Instagram. Send me comments on there, questions you'd like to hear me answer on future Q&A shows. I've been teasing it. I've got a Q&A show coming up. I've been accumulating questions for the past few months, and it's going to be a lot of fun. And don't miss the big Shadow Market coming June 27th at the Manchester Event and Visitor Center in Manchester, Tennessee. It's just outside of Nashville. It's a fairly short drive. Shadow Market's a living tapestry of gothic goods, high fantasy, horror, dark art, oddities, and all things wonderfully weird. Right now, tickets are just $11, but they'll be $15 at the door on the day of the event. You can also purchase tickets and vendor booths at shadowmarketus.com. Be sure to follow Shadow Market on Facebook at facebook.com/shadowmarketus. Thanks for listening to Southern Ghost Stories. I'm Allen Sircy, the American Hauntstorian, and I'll see you guys soon. Monster City Madhouse, a year-round online store full of Halloween and classic horror shirts with an emphasis on the vintage look. Use code SAVE10 for 10% off your order. MonsterCityMadhouse.com. Free shipping and financing's available.